At this point, you all have probably seen the lack of inventory for the RTX 3000 series, at least if you missed the 30-second window you had to buy them. And so we spent basically the whole day talking to partners, to people at SIs, at OEMs, even at NVIDIA, on and off record, to try and figure out what the situation is for supply. The primary questions we're looking to answer today are going to be, what's the restocking interval or cycle? How frequently is this product, the 3080, being restocked? How frequently should you check to see if you can get one? How long are you going to have to wait to try and get one when they're restocked? The other question that we had for everybody was, would you consider this a paper launch from the perspective of whomever we were speaking to? So this is a report where we're compiling a lot of discussion with people all over the industry who work with NVIDIA. That includes people all the way down to water block makers who are just trying to make their blocks in time, and up, of course, to SIs, OEMs, and officially some statements from NVIDIA on record. Before that, this video is brought to you by EK and the EK AIO series. We recently reviewed the EK AIO DRGB 360 as one of the top performers in our CPU cooler charts, advantaged from its fan performance and high-quality pump internals that we found during our teardown. If you're looking for a high-performance RGB CPU cooler with longer steady-state times, check out the EK AIO 360 and 240 at the links in the description below. Quick note before we get into this, we're going to be showing some B-roll, some footage of probably 3080 partner cards and the reference card as we talk through this. That's not indicative of anything about where we've gotten information or what company we're talking about at the time. The editors are just going to drop in B-roll as they see fit to cover up cuts. So just want to put that out there before we get going. Don't read too far into it. First of all, there are a lot of factors that compound to the complete sell-through of NVIDIA's inventory. This is somewhat common right now. You look at the PS5, and it's the same story there. It was the same story with previous launches with CPUs as well this year. So some of the factors for that are more people buying now than ever. We did a report previously back in May or thereabouts where we talked about how power supply, that was a liquid nitrogen pressure release. We have streams coming up this weekend with Joe Stepanzi. So that was Joe, AKA Bearded Hardware's way of announcing himself, I guess. Anyway, that aside, what was I talking about? The sell-through of products since about May now, and back to March, depending on which region you're talking about. We previously talked about how, for power supplies especially, but components in general for PC, in March and April, the component manufacturers were seeing demand that was equivalent to November and December, where you're looking at Black Friday for the US and buying season for end-of-year holidays, Christmas, things like that. So November, December are traditionally and expectedly the absolute highest peak sales time throughout any industry, but especially this one. And partners were telling us that they were seeing near equivalent demand in earlier this year when it's effectively a dead season every year prior to this one. So that is something to consider here as well. One of the first things I want to talk about here is just consumerism and an unhealthy or dangerous amount of hype. Unhealthy either for the people or uneconomically sound, or just unhealthy for the planet, because buying a bunch of crap because it's new and shiny isn't a good reason to buy stuff, and getting swept up in the hype for a commodity isn't a place you want to be. So this is just sort of a, let's just talk as a community here for, like, if you're mad that you couldn't buy the 3080, then there's probably some other issues we need to talk about. One of those is perhaps NVIDIA's marketing. The up to 2x really only happened in RTX, and things like Quake RTX, for example, where it's fully path traced, and that's where that number is derived from. But then still, and also the only set of media numbers when it first came out, where it's all curated titles with the hand-built drivers for a one-off content piece and not a third-party review, and that's suddenly hoisted up on this pedestal as if it's the entire performance for the platform. So these are two of the factors that built towards this excitement. And then even with the reviews, people still feel very excited despite sort of the fact that we did our best here in content pieces, in the architecture piece, in the news announcement, and in the review. We said, don't buy this thing just because it's shiny and new. Buy it because you actually need it, you're unhappy with your system, you do work and it'll help you make more money. Whatever your justification is, it shouldn't just be, oh my God, I want it, this is so cool. That is a bad place to be as a consumer, and it's a bad place to be as a society. So I wanted to address that first because it's just been, I felt like despair looking at some of the comments where you see users who feel despair because they couldn't buy a $700 commodity. Like, come on, it's just a video card. It's not like it's food and water. So, let's tone down the hype a little bit here. The product's good. It's not that good. You don't need to feel like the world is like coming to an end because you couldn't get it on day one. And this isn't addressing most of you in the audience. It's addressing like a very specific group of people who are very vocal, and it's not just like I'm mad at NVIDIA. It's like I'm mad at everybody because I couldn't get the video card. So just, please, as a reminder, don't get too hyped to the point where you have your heart set on buying this thing on a specific day. And, it's not the best situation for something to be instantly out of stock in seconds. It's frustrating, but it shouldn't be like ruining your week. That's kind of where I'm trying to draw the line, just as a reminder for everybody. Ultimately, we're looking at this from a consumer-first standpoint, and I'm personally, not that my personal opinion should matter too much, but I do own Gamers Nexus, the company that reviews things, so it does influence. But personally, I'm like, if you can stretch out a 980 Ti, an R7 270X for however long, then keep doing it, because I don't want to see a bunch of e-waste piled up when existing cards are perfectly fine. And that kind of bleeds into this, where I'm like, okay, let's tone this down a little bit. There's a little bit too much. It's like not just people being frustrated; it's people being like pissed, and that's not good. You don't want to be there. It's bad for consumers. Bad place for society to be. So that said, there are things to be pissed at, but it shouldn't just be the ability to get the card. One of them might be the bot scripts. This was something that came up where there was a story written that was pretty good. I think it was PC Mag, about a script that was built specifically or tuned specifically to grab cards as they became available and then resell them. NVIDIA is trying to address this and claims that it will be manually intercepting orders. This is unfortunately just going to be part of life, and even with countermeasures, it's still going to happen. And you really see this start happening with, again, like Apple products. You start seeing it with Tesla products. So it's just the way things are going, where it's like ticket scalping, except it's technology. And some of this needs to be addressed with things like government regulation, where there's some of that in place, and in at least some jurisdictions, some countries, for ticket scalping. It needs to be expanded a bit, depending on your viewpoint on that. But yes, the bots were insane. Like, it's crazy, but that's how they're going to be, unfortunately, especially when it's as hyped as it was. So yes, it's bad. No, there's nothing we can really do about it. Hopefully NVIDIA can try and do something. They're the ones who push AI anyway. Maybe they can build a counter bot. Also, the biggest takeaway here that we're going to get into in a little bit is that the board partners were simply not given enough time to really build out the cards and get all of the SKUs to market on launch day. And that contributed in a big way to this as well, where NVIDIA was, it's weird because this was such a leaked launch. It almost seems like, well, like, who cares? Just give the board partners everything. It's all out there anyway. No one cares anymore. But NVIDIA still plays stuff really close to, as we've said in the past, the leather jacket. And so that means that the board partners don't really have enough time to get ramped. And that can lead into some of the supply or the availability issues as well. But ultimately, the biggest... But ultimately here, try to keep perspective on what this thing is. It's not that important. At the end of the day, it's a video card. We see this all the time. The 3950Xs, when they first launched, were extremely difficult to find. The Intel 10900Ks have been extremely difficult to find. And also the AMD RX 5700 XTs had issues where you couldn't really get the partner cards when we were all reviewing them. I remember the same thing we're getting right now on the media side, where we had people after our stream who were like, this is in poor taste that you're doing your job and testing the products. Because remember, the tests we're doing will still be valid when they're in stock later. And the same thing happened with AMD, where actually the 5700 XT is the single most reviewed video card we've ever worked with in terms of our reviews. We produced more partner reviews for the 5700 XT than any other single SKU ever in our history. And I remember for the 3-week period where it was nonstop 5700 XT news for us with a couple other stories dotted between, I remember people being mad that they had trouble or they couldn't buy the partner models. They were non-existent. And the same thing that we said then applies here, where it's like, okay, that's frustrating, but if you're at this level of seething hatred and rage, either towards AMD or towards retailers or whatever, even the bots, even the people who are scalping, you're like, frankly, you're a little overcommitted. There are some people who maybe have a bit more reason to feel that way than others, like perhaps if your career is built on maybe rendering things and you need them, whatever, and it's like make or break whether you get the project done. But just remember, keep perspective what this stuff is. I'm trying to channel my inner Paul's hardware, where it's sort of just like keep a rationality and a reasonableness about it, where you've got the perspective that there are a lot more things outside that are probably more important. And this stuff, it'll be restocked eventually. It's not deserving of all of your angst and attention for the entire day. Maybe for a little bit, like right after you sit there watching the page for say 6 hours or whatever, because you really wanted to buy one, sure. But at some point you gotta draw a line and be like, okay, I'll come back to this later. I got other stuff to do. That said, I'm not a life coach. It's not really my job. So hopefully that provides just some needed perspective on this product was overhyped by a mixture of leaks, by marketing, which was of questionable accuracy, and then just by the fact that it was a good product. It did well. Not as well as maybe some of the people were expecting based on initial reports from a limited source of information, but it's still a good product, and that contributes as well. But there's also the question of just, well, how much supply was there? And we have a couple of statements we're going to go through. We also have a whole lot of off-record conversation. Let's start with the official statements from NVIDIA. We had 2 of them. One of them we requested yesterday, which was the launch day for the reviews, but not the launch day for the product. So it was prior to the product going up. The other one is an update today, where we got a new statement after the sell-through of the product. And this came after we actually were checking websites. So NVIDIA's website, Newegg, Best Buy, and Amazon, a couple of B&H Photo. We were checking those at the launch time, 9 a.m. Eastern, for these cards to try and get more of them other than our review samples. And I was personally sitting there refreshing pages for basically a couple minutes before launch to 15 minutes after launch or so. And in that whole window, never once did I see it say add to cart. It went from notify to out of stock. And that's just how quickly they sold out. So okay, the first statement we got from NVIDIA was before the availability of the card, and that statement is as follows, quote, "We have been in production since August, and we will have wide availability of the RTX 3080 from NVIDIA and partners starting tomorrow, September 17th, 2020. Volume will be in line with past launches, and as you can imagine, we are expecting unprecedented demand. Stock will be replenished as fast as possible." So this is actually a much more useful statement than we'll typically get from companies when we ask these questions, primarily because it pointed to a production since August window. So that gave us an actual hard figure of some kind to apply to the topic. Now, obviously, this changed very quickly, or at least the demand perhaps was higher than expected. The updated quote we got was within an hour or so of the product going live and being available, and that one reads as follows. Quote, "This morning we saw unprecedented demand for the GeForce RTX 3080 at global retailers, including the NVIDIA online store. At 6 a.m. Pacific, we attempted to push the NVIDIA store live. Despite preparation, the NVIDIA store was inundated with traffic and encountered an error. We were able to resolve the issues and sales began registering normally. To stop bots and scalpers on the NVIDIA store, we're doing everything humanly possible, including manually reviewing orders to get these cards in the hands of legitimate customers. Over 50 major global retailers had inventory at 6 a.m. Pacific. Our NVIDIA team and partners are shipping more RTX 30 cards every day to retailers. We apologize to our customers for this morning's experience," end quote. And this story continues too. We actually grabbed some screenshots when Newegg went down. Newegg had 2 different errors we kept seeing getting thrown right when the inventory was available. By the time we cleared those errors and got through to the page, they were gone. EVGA's website, we checked them as well. Their store site went down during this period. And we also checked NVIDIA's website, and we did have issues that are described in this statement. So to kind of get the perspective in line, in speaking with partners, this was the highest volume that some of them have ever seen to a single launch for the product pages that describe the products to the store pages if they have a first-party store available. So the traffic to the websites for many of the board partners was a record high, which is insane if you think about that. Like, that's the history of at least the last several generations, the most relevant ones for discussion. It was all exceeded by today, by one card announcement. And that's the other thing to keep in mind too. This is one SKU. NVIDIA launched just the 3080. So this isn't like some previous launches where you'll get maybe two SKUs at around the same time to help split the load between them. Now, speaking about the supply. So we asked around SIs and the board partners alike, and our understanding right now, and speaking with off-record sources, so they can't go on record, give us quotes for this stuff, as you would expect, but the stock is apparently similar to the 20 series stock, or for some people a little bit higher, depending on how they've kind of elevated in their rank over the past 2 years. So it's not like this was a paper launch in the sense of having zero inventory or being a PR only or being a press only launch. There was inventory, but it blew through really fast. That means that there wasn't enough supply, obviously, but that doesn't necessarily mean that there was no supply, which is kind of what a lot of the indication has been from people online. In fact, we did get some hard figures from some of the partners and SIs out there, and one of them, I can't give any specifying details as to what part of the industry they're in, because they'll be sort of tracked down. I can't give the exact hard number either for the same reason, but we'll get you close to it. So one of them had over 900 units available, and this was for a company that builds computers, so we're talking about full system build. And the inventory of systems with the cards in them was gone in under 10 minutes. And we were talking with the SIs and the OEMs about this, and two of the SIs, so system integrators is what SI is, that would be companies that are not like HP or Dell. They're the ones that do more gamer-targeted ones, more like DIY-style builds. So two of the SIs told us that they looked at the carts, so the abandoned carts on the website, where people have put together orders but haven't finalized them. Like most store sites, they can see how many carts are left sitting and abandoned. And apparently, a lot of the customers had this strategy, and it's kind of brilliant, of configuring the whole system and then saving the cart and coming back the next day to add just the video card. That way they could get it done faster than people who had not done that. So the people were like preparing for this more than anything they've ever prepared for. As that's what you're competing with as a consumer, is either scalpers or other consumers who just happen to hit refresh at the right time and landed on the page when it was still working, or maybe prepared their cart if it had been from an SI or an OEM. So when we asked around to partners are normally the quickest to throw NVIDIA under the bus, and this is also why NVIDIA keeps information from partners as best it can, because they know that their partners, and that would include the board partners and the SIs, are normally the quickest to talk to media about issues, because then it can put some pressure on NVIDIA, and it's fairly anonymized. So the partners this time, we have quotes from a few of them where can't reveal what company it was, but the quote was, "It was definitely not a paper launch. It was a reasonable amount, but it just all sold out. Inventory was similar to previous launches," which aligns with what NVIDIA was saying about inventory being similar to previous launches. So when we were asking why did it sell out so fast this time, you think? Obviously, hype and interest. The product is pretty good, especially if you compare it to the RTX 20 series. In context of the 20 series, the 30 series was a massive overhaul in reputation for NVIDIA. RTX is actually like a thing you can use, even if you don't care about it. At least it's not like last time, where we were on camera saying this RTX thing right now is basically vaporware, because it was 60 days until the Windows patch came out to enable it. So that's a significant change, the perception of the product. The other significant change is, again, the impact from human malware availability, still kind of avoiding that word for YouTube reasons, but where the demand is still, it's not quite at levels of March and April when we're asking the component manufacturers, and this is everyone, not just NVIDIA's partners, not quite at those levels, but they're still at levels that are record high for this period. Meaning year over year against multiple years, these sales are still unexpectedly high. So you've got that to deal with too. The other part to deal with is there is a total lack of a direct competitor right now. There's no AMD in the market to try and siphon those sales away. Because if AMD had its own 700 or 650 or whatever dollar competitor, then now you're looking at a situation where some users might say, well, I'm just going to buy AMD because of reason X, Y, Z. Maybe I want better OpenCL performance or whatever the case may be. So that is another contributing factor to this. We asked about sales volume, and up until September 1st, apparently the sales volume of video cards specifically was still at record highs for the periods, but at September 1st, the sales fell off a cliff. And that's because that's when Jensen did his announcement of the 30 series for NVIDIA. Jensen's Juan, the CEO of NVIDIA. Another factor when asking around that we actually hadn't considered was a slowdown in availability of the 20 series stock. So first of all, we asked about the selling history of the 20 series to multiple partners, and the answer was that for the first, I guess it'd be about year and a half or so, the sales were not that good for the 20 series. They were sitting on a lot of inventory in some cases, but as soon as lockdowns started to hit and we hit that high selling period, so many people were building new computers that at a period when, for a product which has been out for over a year, at a period when it should be nearing a steep fall off of a cliff for sales volume, the 20 series, which was approaching end of life but not quite there, actually accelerated in sales. And that is so unprecedented, and it's because of factors outside of the industry directly that you end up with a situation where there's a lack of availability for existing products in some cases for the 20 series, and then they go EOL, and for about 2 months prior to the September 1st announcement, partners were slowing down or stopping altogether the manufacturing of 20 series cards. Now you have a pent-up demand where people couldn't buy it when they wanted a 20 series. They get close enough to 30, they say, screw it, I'll wait. And now you end up with the situation today where there's nothing left. So in speaking with the partners, we were able to get one on-record statement about restocking, and this one's from EVGA. EVGA, we asked them, how frequently are you restocking the cards? And the framing we had for this question was, I said to the rep, so we've noticed almost despair in the forums about people being unable to get this product. We've seen a lot of people concerned they're not going to be able to get it till November, December. What's your rate of restock? And is there a hope for people? And the answer was that EVGA currently is restocking actually every couple of days. And that means to their direct sales website on EVGA.com, it means to newegg.com, and to whatever other retailers they ship to. So they're restocking every couple days. There's actually more stock for them coming in tomorrow. And whether that goes on the store tomorrow or the next day, I'm not sure. But over the next 2 days, you should be checking the retailers to see if you see more cards popping up. This is true for a couple of other vendors as well, but some of them, we didn't give them enough time to go on record with the statement to get cleared by legal and PR. But so that's their plan. They also told us that more models are coming in and getting skewed up. So these are things where it's arriving to the warehouse, they have to create the SKUs, get it all entered, and ship it out to wherever it's going. So you have to give it a bit of a latency there, but it sounds like every couple days you might have a chance at getting a card if you wanted one. We spoke with a couple of others, and one of the quotes we got was kind of interesting, where a representative said, the want for this product is higher, so when you don't get it, the disappointment is greater. And that is clearly true when you look at discussion online today. Okay, so additional information. This is a highly anticipated product, and just like with iPhones, with PlayStations, and everything else right now, especially right now, it is going to sell out basically day one. Regardless of how much inventory NVIDIA had, pay-per-launch or not, it probably was going to sell out day one. I don't think anyone was necessarily expecting literally seconds for it to be gone on some websites, but that's how it worked out. For the 24th, our understanding is that the websites that did experience outages, like Newegg, for example, are trying to fix the situation so that when the 3090 launches, they don't have the same problem of the site just going down. Because that just feels kind of unfair as a consumer, where you hit refresh and you get a 501 error or something like that, while someone else hits refresh half a second sooner and they get it. So apparently they're just spinning up more servers, I guess, or CDNs or something to deal with that load. That said, we don't expect that this would be 3080 levels of demand when the 3090 launches, unless there are really that many people willing to double their budget because they couldn't get a 3080. One interesting fact here as well is the volume. So we were asking, we can't share hard numbers in terms of quantities for a lot of reasons, but we can give you some percentages and relative sense of scale. And some of the partners were telling us that for their launch, so today, when filming anyway, the 17th, the launch is about 5 to 10% of the inventory that will be received by early November. So that gives you a sense of how much more is coming in. We were told that in particular, October, between all the partners we spoke to, October sounds like the heaviest period of restocking. September, they're getting a lot more in every couple days, every couple weeks. This is all air freight. It's really expensive to air freight stuff, but the demand is high enough that that's what they're doing to try and keep up. But it sounds like for September, you might not have that great of a chance at getting one. If you really, really need it, you should probably be checking every day or every couple days to see if you get lucky. When the companies restock on their website is kind of nebulous, but reasonable times to check would normally be midnight, Eastern or Pacific, depending on maybe where they're headquartered, or say 6 a.m. Pacific or 9 a.m. Eastern for the US-based sites. Those are common restocking times, but now that the launch is done, who knows? It could just be as soon as they get in, they put it in stock. But if I were going to try and game the system, those are the times I would personally be checking, would be times when it would make sense to have a rollover in the system if you're automating it and scheduling it. Probably midnight for wherever they're headquartered, and then 9 a.m. because that's the common launch time. So that's what you should be checking. It sounds like to have the best chance of something, it's October is when you're gonna have the best chance of getting one. That'll probably satisfy a lot of the demand out there. And then November after that. October will still be before RDNA 2, so there's still not gonna be a big magnet to pull sales away, but maybe people will start waiting once it gets that close. It was interesting talking to these partners too, because one common theme between all of them was that the stress was extremely high today in the meetings. Whenever there's a launch day, there are meetings from basically everyone in the company who has any interfacing with customers or with media or engineers too, or PMs actually probably more so than engineers, but where the management is trying to get a sense for restocking periods, things like that. So pressure's high because selling through something so fast is good, but it's also bad because whoever's able to get more inventory fastest, whoever pays the most for shipping and burns midnight oil the most at the factories, they're the ones who are going to grab all those sales. People don't really care what partner model it is for the most part. Maybe you do, but a lot of people don't. They'll grab whatever's available first. So the pressure's high right now. Everybody's trying to get inventory in. But again, the most interesting quote we got was it was definitely not a paper launch one. And then information from system integrators where they were getting similar volume to previous launches. A couple of other interesting bits of information. Speaking with some of the water block manufacturers, they were unable to get blueprints early this time. This is just universally, all of them. There's not that many of them. We spoke to pretty much all the major water block manufacturers and some of the smaller ones. They weren't able to get blueprints from NVIDIA. So some of them got some early heat maps in of here's the sources of where you can expect heat to be, but they were unable to get actual screw placement diagrams, hole distance diagrams, heights for say inductors, MOSFETs, things like that. And that means that a lot of them will have to physically measure boards. Some of them got in plastic prototypes, but in speaking with the open loop manufacturers, it sounds like, as is reasonable, they're a bit scared of building potentially hundreds or thousands of units over time based off of a plastic dummy. So they're kind of waiting for the real cards. And some of those people were up at the same time, checking the websites at the same time, trying to get a card so they can make a product for it. So think about that for a second. And I can expand on this too. We had board partners who were telling us that they didn't get drivers before we did. And we hear that pretty much every year. It's always crazy to us, but sometimes in press you get the drivers a bit earlier. So anyway, the partners weren't given very much time by NVIDIA is the real takeaway here. And it sounds like they didn't have enough time to put the cards together. This is evidenced by the fact that there aren't custom PCBs aplenty this time, and a lot of them are on a reference board from NVIDIA. And it's also evidenced by the lack of inventory for some of the partners, evidenced by the fact that they're air freighting everything in. They didn't even know the prices much before we did, and we knew it when you did, which was when Jensen said it on camera. So basically, a lot of secrecy leading up to the launch has caused some delays in the pipeline. The answers are no, it does not appear to be a paper launch. The supply was similar to previous launches. We asked about the 2080 Ti. And the answer universally was there was significantly more supply than the 2080 Ti. We asked about the 2080 Fe, and we were told that the supply was at least similar to the 2080 Fe. And we asked about the Super Series as well. The Super Series, apparently there were never really any supply issues. Perhaps not surprising, because it's a refresh in the middle of two architectures, so people may not have been buying. But that's the situation as it stands. The partners are restocking every couple days. You can expect major restocks in October, and you can expect larger but not major restocks in about 1 to 2 weeks. So keep an eye out. But mid-October sounds like the safest bet for when you're going to see the most inventory. So then final discussion of paper launch or not. Well, to kind of define that word, it seems like it sort of has two definitions depending on who you're asking. And people are pretty, we'll say, salty about this in general. So a lot of people will be in one camp more than the other. One definition of paper launch is literally paper, specs. And that's kind of it. And maybe there's a press launch where you see reviews like ours. Maybe there's a PR, a press release cycle for all the partners, but there's not really, like almost literally zero inventory. That's pretty rare. Typically you see that when a company's under pressure where they've got a competitor who's actually nearby with a launch. AMD is not actually nearby with a launch. RDNA 2 is pretty far away as far as production timelines go. Not that far in reality in the scope of being a human and living day to day, but pretty far in terms of product cycles. So that's something to consider. But that's one angle of paper launch. The other angle is it seems like people are just feeling like the demand was so high that there was no supply when in actual fact, there was a good amount of supply. It's just all gone. So, and that's really, right now, it seems like that's kind of the trend for everything. It'll probably happen with RDNA 2, paper launch or not. It's likely they'll sell out immediately, almost regardless of how good the product is too these days, because there's just, people are buying a lot right now. And that's just the nature of the market. It's a very strange time for consumerism, but that's what people have decided to do. Otherwise, stay tuned, subscribe for additional reports on the series and reviews as they become available. And we'll see you all next time.